Hello, freshmen. Welcome back to another video on this beautiful May Day, May 20th. Today is Wednesday. It looks beautiful outside. Recording this in the morning. You guys will be seeing it pretty soon. Hope all is well. Back to another World War I video here. This is our fourth video, I believe. It's going to be at least one, maybe two more. But we have about a week left on World War I. So we're really getting into like the nitty gritty. We're getting into the point of the war where things really start to heat up. I mean, for the most part, the war, as we talked about, was a stalemate and things were slow. But now we're going to get into the larger sweeping movements. We're going to talk about how America gets involved. So we're a little more than halfway through the war. So I'd say another 3-4 lessons on it. And then I think we're going to do a live Kahoot game. It's going to be optional. If you don't want to come, you don't have to. You'll have an alternate assignment if you want, but we're going to do a live Kahoot review. So it'll be fun. We'll do it on Zoom. Prepare us for the test. I mean, in about a week or a week and a half, and then we'll move on to our final topic, which is World War II. So again, miss you guys. If you're wondering why I'm wearing a hat, it's because my hair, I kind of look like a grizzly bear, and I don't really know what's going on with this anymore. So it's just a disaster. So we are going to keep it covered up for today's video. Don't mind me, as barbershops apparently are not essential these days. I wish they were. But let's get rolling here, guys. So we've done a lot. We have covered so much, and you guys are crushing it. You guys are showing me that you're paying attention to these videos. You're watching them. You're spending the time. You're pausing them. You're going back. You're reading. You're doing great. I mean, your grades are. I think we probably have about 7 or 8 grades in at this point. I still have 2 more to grade, but continue, guys. Check your grades every day. See what's going on. See how you're doing. Reach out to me. Some of you guys like to email me. I'll get back to you as quick as I can. But keep doing what you're doing. Another month of this online instruction, and then it's summer. The world is slowly starting to come back to its normal ways. So we'll be there, guys. We'll be there. So World War I, the Great War, a war that totally shifted the world dynamic. Everything changed after this total, absolute war. We know the general sides of the war. These are the causes of the war. Main causes, we went over these a bunch of times. You guys should know those by now. All these new technologies you used the first time. You got planes and tanks and submarines, machine guns, gas, barbed wire, all these different things. Very, very intense global conflict. Talked a little bit about Germany, how everybody had each other's backs, and the shot that rings throughout Europe and eventually leads to the Allied powers versus the Central Powers. And we talked about the Black Hand and how this man here, Gavrilo Princip, assassinated Archduke Franz Ferdinand. He was the heir to the throne. And eventually Austria declares war on Serbia, and then Russia jumps right in with the Allied powers, and then the Ottoman Empire and Germany jump in for the Central Powers, and it becomes this all-out war conflict. And you guys at this point, we watched a lot of videos together. We talked about the Schlieffen Plan, where the Central Powers right in the middle there were surrounded, right? They're right in the middle, so they try to push out west first and take care of France. Then they came back to the east and tried to take out the Russians. But it was tough. They were a little bit too slow doing it, so the Schlieffen Plan was a fail for the Central Powers. And you guys watch some videos on the different fronts on trench warfare, on the brutality of the war. These are all things that we've covered. I know I'm going quickly through these pictures. Just a real brief review, get your mind going on this Wednesday here. You watched all these videos, like I said. And so now my thought is, hopefully for you guys, you have a picture, entrenched. I just said trenched, no pun intended, entrenched, deep into your brain about what the actual fighting looked like. What did day-to-day battles look like in this war? What were the troop movements like? And I think, again, you guys have a really good picture of it. I think if you close your eyes and you thought about it, you can picture what, the Western Front might have looked like on the trenches, or some of the more sweeping movements on the Eastern Front with maybe some planes and some tanks. But it's what you picture and what you guys saw in the videos and what you've learned for miles and miles and miles, so many miles, 400 or 500 miles on the Western Front. And again, can't reiterate these two things. World War I was a total war where every country that was involved, their resources were poured into the war. Food, metals, everything you could think of, an absolute total war. And then the fact that the second thing is that it was just a huge stalemate. And the world has never seen a conflict on this scale, and it's about to get even bigger because America is about to get involved, as well as a lot of other countries, including Africa. Okay. So again, here's our map. We've seen this one a couple times. Central Powers right in the middle. This. Think about if this war was different on really any aspect, right? If there were small little changes to a battle plan, to maybe one shot made the difference. It's like the butterfly effect, how things would have been different. Okay. So today we're going to get into talk a little bit about how Russia struggled, the Gallipoli campaign. You guys read about this on Monday a little bit, but I just wanted to talk about it a little bit now. Russia played a really key role in this war. Okay. Ask yourself why. Okay, Russia is to what direction of the Central Powers here? They are to the east, right? They're on the Eastern Front. Think about, now I'm not going to use the word easy, but think about how much more effective the Central Powers could have been if you just put a big old X over Russia and they're not involved in the war at all. Because then look, all that the Central Powers would have to do, and it might be easier said than done, is just push all of their resources, all their soldiers, everything that they had to the Western Front, right? So Russia was so valuable to the Allied powers in this war because they might not have been as industrialized or as advanced. Russia was a little bit behind with the times technologically wise, but they kept the Central Powers totally tied up and forced them to fight a war on both fronts here. Okay, so even though, again, they weren't as powerful, they still slowly but surely wore down Germany and Austria-Hungary and the Ottoman Empire. And it was luckily for them, luckily for the Russians, they weren't eliminated from the war very, very early. They do have to eventually pull themselves out of the war, unfortunately, in 1918. That's the same year that the war actually ends. But Russia does struggle. But again, they're important because they keep them tied up. They're so significant, but they're cut off as well, right? So we talked about how the Gallipoli campaign was a way for the Allies. I'll read it right here. It says, the Gallipoli campaign was when the Allies attacked Dardanelles, which is in the Ottoman Empire, because they wanted to gain Constantinople to gain a supply line to Russia. So let's read that again. This Gallipoli campaign, this was an Allied attack. Now, the Schlieffen Plan was Central Power move. The Gallipoli campaign was Allied powers. Their plan was attack Dardanelles, which is in the Ottoman Empire, to gain Constantinople and create that supply line into Russia. Okay, looking at the map here. Here is their plan. So if you look, hopefully you can see my mouse. If you look down here, this is where the Gallipoli campaign takes place. You can see the purple, which is France and Italy. They want to storm all the way down here in the south. I guess you could call this the south east part of the war. And they want to push through this region called the Dardanelles, eventually get their way into Constantinople, which is in the Ottoman Empire. And if you can take over this area here, then boom, you have direct contact to Russia. Now, it's not like today where you can just fly a massive supply plane from France over into Russia and say, okay, here's supplies and here's some more troops and we're out. No, planes barely, the success rate on flights on planes was very low. They could go maybe 120 miles an hour, could stay in the air for maybe 2 hours. So there's really no way for the Allies at all to resupply Russia with troops, with food, with ammunition, with shells, with anything. The North Sea and the Baltic Sea were totally dominated by Germany in terms of their submarines and their unrestricted submarine warfare. So really the only way to get a supply line to Russia was by trying this Gallipoli campaign, which was named after a person. Eventually, unfortunately, it failed. Guess what happened? They make a prediction, right? What was the fighting like for this whole war? Were there massive gains quickly? No, it was for the most part stalemates, right? So this Gallipoli campaign turned into yet another stalemate, and the struggling Russia was again left on their own. About 250,000 allies were killed during that Gallipoli campaign. Unfortunately, that plan as well was not successful. Okay, a lot of planning in this war, a lot of the big attacks, a lot of the big moves were unsuccessful just because of the dynamic of the war, because of the trenches, because of the new technology being used. No one could really make massive gains quickly. I know I've stressed that a lot. Okay, but again, now that the Gallipoli campaign failed, Russia was in big trouble. They faced massive food shortages, guns, clothes, blankets, boots, supplies, again, because they were cut off. But the Russians were relentless. They had that massive population, one of the biggest in the world. They just kept hurling everything from younger children. I'm not saying 10, 12, but 15, 16-year-olds being thrown into the war. People that you might not think would be able to fight in the war. Russia was like, all right, let's go. You're up. Next up. Let's go. We got to win this war. It's a total war. They're putting everybody into it. So they kept trying and trying and trying. But they were pretty much near collapse around 1916. And we'll just say they were in a lot of trouble. Okay. So now let's talk a little bit about, actually, let me ask you this first as well. I'll go back to Russia here. If you're a Russian leader at this time, if you're someone that's controlling Russia, or even if you're a citizen of Russia, ask yourself, is it worth it? If you lived in Russia, you might be able to sit here now and say, okay, this war was worth it. Let's do it. If we're Russia, let's go. Let's hurl all of our citizens. Let's go all in. But the war in Russia, once 1916 hit, about 2 years into the war, about halfway in, was so unpopular. I mean, there were riots on the streets. There were people parading around the whole country of Russia saying, let's get out of this war. We're losing way too many people, way too many family members, way too many friends, way too many citizens. There are people in Russia, we talked about rationing with food, with no food. They're not eating. They're living. They're not only losing people, but they're losing or losing, people in the military. They're losing people that are not in the war as well, because they're just not eating, because every single resource is put into this war. So again, in Russia, people were like, this war is like, why are we doing this? So it was so unpopular. So ask yourself, and I'll ask you guys this question too. If you're Russia at this point, how do you feel? If you're a Russian citizen, how do you feel? Or if you're a Russian military leader, how do you feel? You might feel differently, right? So think about the perspectives. Is war worth, at least for Russia at this time, the tremendous, insane, detrimental sacrifices? That's why there's a lot of people out there that are just totally against war in general. Is it inevitable sometimes? Yeah. But again, World War I was so unpopular in Russia just because of their struggles. But again, what if Russia pulled out of this war? I mean, who knows? It's so possible that the Central Powers wind up winning if Russia, removed themselves from the war when they started struggling in 1915, 1916. So just something to think about, the Gallipoli campaign, and Russia. Okay, we talked about technology. The war started with about 850 warplanes. Not that many, that is total. And at the beginning of the war, it's comical to think about this, but instead of shooting missiles at each other and shooting guns at each other, literally these airplanes would drive around, and could be used for recon and seeing things high in the air and checking out what's going on below. But they would literally bring up like a huge bag of rocks with them, and they would be up in the air and they would be throwing rocks down at people. It sounds like something from from like a funny movie or something. Oh, take this. They're throwing rocks at each other from airplanes in the war. But that's like the extent of the technology. But eventually, as the war comes to a close 4 years later, there's a total of over 10,000 planes being used. So aviation became really key in World War I here. Okay, Australia, Japan, India, they all joined the Allies. And then you have the Ottoman Turks and Bulgaria joining the Central Powers. Remained a slow grind. Okay. Here's some of those protests in Russia. I mean, this is an actual picture. Remember, this is one of the first wars that was actually photographed, and it's not just like drawings or paintings or pictures. So this is actually a real picture of Russia during the war. I think this is either 1915, 16, somewhere around there. Some protests, mass people on the streets. You could even see the looks on their faces. They look like they're struggling. These people don't look too happy. This looks like your guys' faces when I say, oh, we have a do now quiz today. That's actually someone from class right there. What? No, but to take the jokes out of it, yeah, they just don't look too happy, and they're very against the war at this time. And this is cool. So this was a German plane called the Fokker, Fokker D7. That's what the fighter jets looked like at the time. Got some statistics on them, so let's see. So yeah, these planes can only go about 120 miles an hour, which sure is fast, but not really for an airplane, right? Today they go so much faster. These planes could spend about 2 hours in the air. They had some guns attached to them. A lot of the times they would just crash, and whoever, the one or two people that were flying it, would die. They were really, really loud, so you could hear them coming from a long while away. But air supremacy was key. Think about why having the high ground and being able to dominate the airspace is so important in war, not just in World War I, but today. And I love comparing to today. If we go a little forward, right, 100 years later, I like to look at like progression in history, right? We look at this plane and it's like, what? They used to use that thing in war? That thing looks weak, right? Well, this is a plane. These are some fighter jets that are used actually in the United States today, American fighter jets. I always think about this, right? I ask this all the time. So 100 years from now, then, is Mr. D'Amico's great grandkid going to be a teacher, and is he going to be like, isn't this funny? Look at this plane they used to use. Like, think about how things have developed so quickly over time, and how technology is not changed just from 100 years ago, how it might change in the future now. Okay, but this is a fighter jet. I mean, these things, guys, the technology on airplanes today is just wild. It costs anywhere from $200 million to $300 to $400 to even like $500 million. Statistic that I found was, it cost. This is how much money it costs to fly one of these things for an hour. $60,000. It costs $60,000 to fly a F-22 Raptor fighter jet in the air for 1 hour. But these things are amazing. They could climb. Here's some other statistics. They could climb 60,000 feet per minute. They can go well over 700, 800 miles an hour. Some of them touch on 1,000 miles per hour. They have missiles. They have bombs. They have heat-seeking missiles where they could just launch missiles out and they hit a target that's basically could follow a plane. They have defense systems in case you do put a heat-seeking missile on them. They could shoot out flares so that the bullets or so that the missiles don't hit them. I mean, these things, you could see them, the way that they move. I mean, the way that it's amazing how far technology's come. This is another one. See, it's got the missile technology on the side. I mean, it costs tons of money, but it shows you these are both American, and America's got one of the best militaries, air forces, today. And it shows you how much Americans value air superiority. So again, it goes back to World War I, and it shows how important air superiority was. It's one of my favorite ones. It's just an Apache helicopter, the Guardian. I mean, this thing. Look at this. The weaponry, the weapon systems on here. I mean, it's unbelievable. I can't get too technical because I don't know that much about it, but I just look at this and I'm like, what does this world come to? Like, look at this thing. I mean, if I saw this, I'd probably be scared for my life if I was on the other side. But again, this is if massive wars today and any battles, anything big that takes place, these are frequently used. These fighter jets, these attack helicopters, and this air superiority aviation all started again in World War I. Okay. Let's see. Did I miss anything? No. All right. We're going to do two more things, and we're going to call it a day for today as we move forward here. So the World War I continues to widen. You guys could see that, by the end of the war, which we're slowly getting towards now, just how many countries are involved in it. I mean, the orange is the Allies at one point or another. The Central Powers, you could even see that Africa is getting involved now. And whereas the war just started because of an assassination and because of those main causes, imperialism, militarism, alliance systems, and so on, in Central Europe, it just keeps expanding and expanding. That's where the Western Front would be. That's where the Eastern Front would be. Another picture of the Gallipoli campaign. There's Dardanelles and Constantinople. Unfortunately, it was a stalemate and a failure. Okay, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions on this map here. This is one right out of the textbook. if we were together, we would look at this together. So just some little more information just to show you the whole world at war. So we'll go top left and we'll make our way around here. So you got North America here. The United States is about to enter the war on the side of the Allies in 1917. And if you are the Central Powers, that's not a sight you want to see. You do not want to see America. That's like, I don't know, that's not a good sight for anybody to have the United States coming into the war. So Germany, which we're going to talk about, is about to make a fatal mistake that forces America's hand and gets them involved in the war. But America comes in 1917. The main fighting in the war occurs on the Western and Eastern fronts, so mostly in Europe. War rages in Southwest Asia as Arab nationalists battle their Turkish rulers. So now there's countries in these Southwest Asian nations fighting and trying to even overtake their rulers. I mean, just a lot going on. You even have Japan declaring war on Germany. They seized German colonies in the China and Pacific area. So now actually Japan and the United States are on the same side. Spoiler alert, they will not be for World War II. And you can see how quickly world dynamic shifts. But even Japan is involved. Brazil is the only South American country to enter the war. So pretty much South America is not involved in the war. But Brazil does come in and supports the Allies with some warships and personnel. They fly, across the Atlantic in Brazil. The biggest country in South America gets involved. We talked a lot about imperialism and how pretty much at this time, Europe controlled most of Africa. So now their African colonies start to get involved in the war. Africa actually becomes a battlefield, and the parties fight over, let's say Germany, who's in the Central Powers, has control of an African country, and next door, France, from the Allied powers, has control of another country in Africa. Now it's not only France and Germany fighting in Europe, it's now France and Germany fighting in Africa. Their colonies are fighting. Even India gets involved in the war. How many world wars, how many massive world conflicts has India really been involved in to this point? Not so many outside of their own domestic wars and issues. So India provides 1.3 million people to fight. They provide labor. Again, India was controlled by Britain, so that's why they also got involved. And then you even have both countries fight on the side of the Allies, Australia, New Zealand. They even contribute troops to the Gallipoli campaign and to the Southwest Asian campaign. So I ask you this question, guys. Do you think, I have no idea what the answer is, so don't ask me what I think. But I just want to hear your opinion because I'm a history nerd and I love thinking about this. Can a war like this happen today? Like, do you guys think it's possible for a world war on this dynamic, of this magnitude? Is it possible for it to exist today with the modern day technology, with the massive world population, obviously the population being as big as it is, with the, would the whole world crumble if World War III happened in 100 years after World War I, in 2022 or something like that? I'm not saying it's going to, I don't think it will, but is it possible? Will the world ever again see a conflict on this scale? We're going to take World War II out of it because World War II is just about as big as World War I is. But, my question here is this possible? Will the world ever see, wars this big? I don't know. I hope we don't find out. And I hope the answer is no. But it's just, the more I read about World War I, the more I sit there just like with my mouth open, like that, how did the world recover from this? It's wild, but you think today with like nuclear weapons and atomic bombs and just the way that war is fought today, it makes me think that this probably can never happen again. Okay. Here is our last topic of the day here. So we've talked a lot about fighting on the ground, fighting on land. We've talked a lot about fighting in the air and the stalemates and the Gallipoli campaign. Now we're going to shift our focus to the seas and the waters, okay? So Germany, during the war, comes up with this idea, which sounds really threatening, and it really was, And it's what it's called now is Germany's unrestricted. Think about it, what it means if something is unrestricted submarine warfare. Germany's unrestricted submarine warfare. Okay. And Germany they might not have had superiority in the air with planes. They did have some planes, but Germany and the Central Powers certainly had superiority on the seas, in the water. They had this newer invention, even though it actually goes back to Leonardo da Vinci, who come up with the first blueprints for submarines. Germany had these submarines. They called them U-boats. They can go underneath the water. Obviously, you know what a submarine is. Deep down into the water, go totally undetected, and they could dominate the seas by patrolling around, by shooting missiles into ships, by reconning the area. There's a lot of different things, a lot of benefits of having domination at the seas. Okay, so this is what one of their boats looked like in World War One. You get the ship's engines made, with generated hydrogen gas. You could fit about 35 people. I mean, today there's submarines that could fit hundreds of people. I've actually been in one in Philadelphia. I mean, it's so cool to walk through a submarine and actually see it. It wasn't underwater. It was obviously above the water. It's like a museum, but everywhere you go in a submarine, and picture it's just a long tube, right? You have to climb up and you climb down and you have to constantly duck your head down. I'm not that tall, but a tall person on a submarine probably doesn't have very fun, but everything is tight. It's dark. There's flashing lights everywhere. There's people sleeping on a double bunk bed, and there's a huge missile, like they can see it right to the right of them because there's no space to store anything. Everything is so tight. But it's really cool. They have torpedoes that are basically an underground missile, and they launch, and it's like a propeller on it. You launch it out, the propeller turns, and it navigates through the water quickly and creates a massive explosion on impact. Range, wow, they go about 9,000 miles. I mean, some submarines today can, go a couple of days under the water without ever having to come up. So it's unbelievable. But this is why Germany was so dominant at the sea, because of what they called their U-boat. That's a World War I picture. You can see kind of the size of it. They're a little bit smaller. And then I found this picture of a newer one. This is a new submarine, and you could see. Look at just look at the people in comparison. Look at the people. Look how the scale, how big they are in terms of their size to the submarine. The submarine goes from about here to here. Look at a modern sub. Person here. Huge submarine. I mean, it's massive, right? But this is what their unrestricted submarine warfare was. This is now Germany saying they basically give notice to the whole world. And Germany says, dear world, I'm actually going to go back to a map here. You can see it clearly. Okay. This is zoomed in. So Germany says to the world, any ships that we see in the North Sea, in the Baltic Sea, or in the Atlantic Ocean, around Great Britain, around where the war is fought, any ship that we see that we're not familiar with, whether it's a passenger ship, whether it's a military ship, whatever it is, we are going to sink, and we're not going to warn you. It could be a fishing boat. It could be there really weren't cruise ships as much at the time. I mean, there was the Titanic, which we're actually going to get into in a little bit, and a ship called the Lusitania. But they're basically warning everybody and saying anything around the water, around Great Britain, we're sinking. We're not warning it. We're doing it. There's nothing you can do about it. Okay. So ask yourself the question again, is that justifiable? Is it okay for the Central Powers, for Germany to say, we're going to sink you. We're going to do this. No matter who you are, no matter where you come from, no matter what, this is our seas. We're going to dominate them. And a lot of people were not very happy about that. So next is going to transition us perfectly into the next class. They're about to make a fatal mistake. This is Germany's warning to America. It says, we could actually read it here. It says, "Notice, travelers, anybody intending to embark on an Atlantic voyage, just remember, dear Americans, if you're going on a trip across the Atlantic Ocean from America to Europe, just remember that war exists between Germany and our allies in Great Britain, and the zone of the war includes the waters adjacent or even to the British Isles." And it goes on and goes on. And basically what it's saying is those ships are liable to destruction. Now, if I was an American citizen at this time, I'm probably not getting on a ship that's going towards a war zone. But nonetheless, people still had freedom to travel. And there is this ship called the Lusitania that has Americans on it. And we talked about Germany's unrestricted submarine warfare. This was not a warship, the Lusitania. This was just a passenger ship, which we're going to get into. What do you think they're going to do? We'll get into that next class. They're about to make a fatal mistake. The Lusitania is sunk, dragging America into the war by a German U-boat torpedo. Okay. All right, so that's it, everybody. I hope you learned a lot today. We did the war widens, we did military aviation, we did the Gallipoli campaign, World at War, and next class we'll have a new video. And we're going to get into America, how America hops in the war. Just to look at a little bit ahead here, something called the Zimmerman Telegram, President Woodrow Wilson, and we'll slowly make our way towards the end of World War I. Okay, so great job, guys. And I'll post this video up, and I'll see you guys soon. Bye, guys.